Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salebox. The Steam sale begins right here on the 11th of June 2015 and will be running through to the 21st of June. There'll be new discounts every day, including, of course, the flash sales, and this time around they're also including a strange little minigame that you can play cooperatively with others, and that will allow you to unlock special discounts as well as level up badges and so on and so forth. Currently, at the time of recording, the game doesn't work because everybody's flooding Steam. This should surprise absolutely nobody ever at this point. So it would seem that they've replaced the community voting that they usually do with this new minigame system, and they're also offering more daily deals than they usually do in each sale. As per usual, the same advice applies. If it's not on a flash sale, if it's not on a daily deal, then don't buy, because there's the possibility that it will go lower than the current sale price. There are usually two kinds of sale prices: the regular sale price and the daily deal and flash sale price, which are the same. And if you do buy it without it being on a daily deal, there is a possibility that you'll end up with a lower price a little bit later on in the sale. It's also worth bearing in mind that the new Steam refund policy does allow for refunds for games bought just before they went on sale. So if you did happen to buy a game at full price and it's just jumped onto the Steam sale, it's possible that you can get a refund at Steam's discretion. Just bear in mind, if you do it too much, then that's a good way to get banned from the refund system, as they are monitoring abuse. Although they have specifically said that they do not consider refunding games bought prior to them going on sale to be abuse. So I imagine what they do is refund you the difference. So just bear that in mind. If any of you got screwed over by that, then you can possibly get some of that money back. Alright, let's kick it off, shall we? And for the sake of completeness this time around, we will be including Sega games. It was confusing for people that I was missing titles from the list. The ongoing critique boycott and promotional boycott for Sega stuff continues, thanks to their false copyright strikes a few years ago on my channel, but I'm going to include the Sega published games in the Salebox lists because it is best for the consumer, and it's really weird to have incomplete lists like that. Anyway, let's start off with one, Valkyria Chronicles. This game originally came out on the PlayStation 3. It was one of the first must-haves on that system as far as I'm concerned, and it's a little bit of a weird one. It's a third-person tactical RPG, and most tactics RPGs involve moving something around with a certain number of action points, placing it somewhere on a grid, and then shooting and attacking and so on and so forth. You kind of do the same thing here, except you control a character from the third person, and there's an element of real time in it. And you have essentially action points, but it's based on how far you move. So you run around, kind of position your guy in third person, take a shot, which you have to aim, and go on from there. An interesting little mix of third-person shooter and tactics. It's really, really good. It's got a fantastic aesthetic, a great story, plenty of content involved, since it also includes the DLC, and it runs really well on PC. It's actually a great port. So I would recommend it, actually. I think it's a really, really good game. I enjoyed it a great deal when it came out first on PlayStation 3. I played a huge amount of it. And if you can deal with a few of the little anime tropes from here and there, what you'll find is a very enjoyable and unique tactics game set in a sort of alternate universe, World War I, World War II sort of setting. It's pretty cool. Grand Theft Auto 5. Wow, this is discounted. It's a trap, ladies and gentlemen. It really, really is. It looks like it's discounted. What they're actually doing is giving you a discount if you buy it along with one of their ridiculous shark cards, which is in-game money for the multiplayer. Yup, they are selling, quote, microtransactions, unquote, for their multiplayer mode. Yeah, that's not ridiculous or anything, considering the game costs $60 bloody. So if you want to buy it bundled with one of those shark cards, go right ahead. You can. But you're not saving any real money. You're only essentially getting a free shark card. You're going to be spending the same price regardless. It's still a full-priced release. Not really a brilliant sale, is it? You can also get a wonderful 33% discount on their virtual currency. How about no? Just for the sake of completeness, though, I will say that Grand Theft Auto 5 is, for the most part, a really good port. It runs fairly well, and of course, Grand Theft Auto 5 is a fantastic game, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. But this nonsense with the multiplayer and the virtual currency does leave me feeling a little bit sour, especially when it comes into a sale pretending to be a discount. Darkest Dungeon. Well, this game was fairly popular when it first released on Early Access, and it had a really big stream following. Indeed, I streamed it, and I had a lot of fun with it. The thing is that it ran out of content quite quickly, and people sort of moved away from it and got a little bit bored. And there is more content coming for it. In fact, there was just a recent release of a content pack for the game, but it is still in early access. So it's a pretty reasonable dungeon crawler whereby you have a party of 4 and you'll engage in tactical battles which often involve the positioning of your party. So let's say, for instance, a guy with a ranged weapon is up front. He probably can't shoot because he can only shoot from the second or the third row in your party, and so on and so forth. And you crawl through these dungeons, which are, for the most part, randomly generated. You grab loot, and you try to avoid deadly traps. You also try to keep your sanity up by keeping the light meter high and manage your resources, and not have your people horribly murdered, which can happen. And what you'll also try and do is renovate this ruined town over the course of the game, which allows you to unlock a bunch of other stuff. So it's got some roguelite progression elements involved in it. It's really great. The art style's fantastic, and the narrator really adds a great deal of atmosphere to the game, and it's pretty damn difficult, but it's not complete yet. And honestly, as it's a really good game already, I would suggest actually waiting for release so you can have the complete experience. I feel less enthusiastic about the game now because I played it too early, and I think that's the problem of many early access games. So unless you are absolutely desperate to jump on it right now, I think that waiting for release is a better call. Binding of Isaac Rebirth. You know, I do see the appeal of Binding of Isaac, but I have been put off forever by its aesthetic. Not really just its aesthetic, though, because I'm not really a huge fan of this top-down roguelite shooter thing that's going on, and there's quite a few games that do this, and I'm not really too keen on any of them, honestly. Binding of Isaac Rebirth is probably the best in the genre, if that's what you're into, and there's so much replayability if that's what you're into. It involves you starting off with the ability to shoot tiers, yes, tiers, and you will try to make your way through procedurally generated levels, get power-ups and so on and so forth, get a bunch of unlocks. It has a metric ton of content, and it's really well remastered from its original form, which was actually a Flash game, if you can believe it. Very, very popular game, highly rated, if you're into that particular genre, and if you can stomach the aesthetic, which is somewhat gross out in many ways. I'm personally not into the genre or the aesthetic, so Binding of Isaac is not really high on my playing priority list, but I can definitely see why people would enjoy it. And it's certainly worthy of the price tag. It has a lot to offer. Hotline Miami 2, wrong number. Well, this game was for the most part well received. I personally enjoyed it a great deal. I think maybe even more than the original, although some people will certainly disagree with me on that one. Some people complain that Hotline Miami 2 has a few parts which are a little bit cheesy when it comes to the difficulty, getting shot off the side of the screen, which actually never had happened to me, and they often complain that the level design in this particular version is not quite as good because the levels end up being too long. I personally don't agree, and I think the level design is great, and they did a fantastic job of differentiating the levels with a bunch of different themes and keeping you guessing. It's an adrenaline-fueled top-down shooter. You die instantly. It's almost like a moment-to-moment real-time puzzle, trying to figure out exactly the optimal way to clear the buildings of the bad guys without getting shot and killed, and since you die in one hit, it takes quite a lot of effort. It has a very trippy aesthetic and storyline, and it has a bunch of really interesting character masks which really change your playstyle, so I enjoyed that a great deal. I think it's worthwhile, although if you haven't played the original game, that's even cheaper. That's an absolute steal at the current sale price. I found that game to actually make me seasick a little bit, because it does sway back and forth a little bit more than Hotline Miami 2 does, but regardless, if you can get over that, it's just a phenomenal title. Absolutely fantastic. Don't Starve. It is the only complete survival game right now. The rest of them are in bloody early access, and this one's quite good. It's by Clay. You can probably tell by the unique art style. It is a top-down survival game in which you must craft and attempt to scavenge your way to success and survival. You need to go through various seasons, you need to fend off monsters and events, and of course insanity, which can claim your life if you're not careful. It's got a really interesting theme to it. It's got a couple of little minor horror elements, the sort of eldritch themes running throughout, and it also happens to have its expansion Don't Starve Together, which allows you to play co-op multiplayer, which is really quite fulfilling. The one thing I will say is that this game is less combat focused than many survival games. It does have a combat system, but it's very, very basic. It's just click on stuff until it dies for the most part. But if you're into the survival aspect a little bit more, and the crafting aspect and exploring mysteries, then Don't Starve is chocked full of that, and it's really quite good as a result. Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Revolution. Big warning on this one, it's locked to 30 frames per second on PC. Yep, I'm not kidding, people still do that. It's not the first Naruto game to be locked that way either. Outside of that, this is a Naruto-based fighting game in which you run around the world, do quests, and then get into 1v1 fights for the most part, and they take place in a sort of 3D arena. The game is lacking in terms of the story mode, so you do want to watch out for that. It's got a couple of little campaigns called Ninja Escapades, but they're really not very long. I mean, they're like an hour at most. So, unless you really enjoy the fighting system, which is really very flashy but quite simplistic, or you're really into the anime, you can probably safely avoid this one, I'm afraid. It does have online multiplayer, although it's not particularly well designed, and unfortunately the scene is pretty much dead now with around 100 concurrent players at most for this title. So, this is a safe avoid unless you are hugely into the anime. Look, I have nothing to say about Farming Simulator 15. If you're the kind of person that's into those sort of games, you probably know what's going on anyway. And if you're not, you have no reason to care. The Sniper Elite franchise. Not a bad little franchise if I do say so myself, although I have to say that Sniper Elite 3 is a significant improvement on Sniper Elite 2. The original Sniper Elite was actually very, very good and extremely well regarded, although it's showing its age a little bit these days. I would say that Sniper Elite 3 is worth getting. There's a good discount on it as well. Sniper Elite 2 is a lot cheaper, but the main problem with that game is that it's highly linear, and more often than not, a stealth approach is actually nigh on impossible simply because of the way that the levels are designed. Whereas with Sniper Elite 3, that isn't the case. They've put a lot more focus onto much more open levels, much larger levels, and you've got a lot more options, and the stealth approach is absolutely viable. It also looks pretty damn good, and the multiplayer mode isn't too shabby either. So, Sniper Elite 3 is probably the standout from that. And, of course, they do have the trilogy of Nazi Zombie Army, which is a set of wave-based co-op online games in which you shoot Nazi zombies. And I find it astonishingly dull. A lot of people, for some reason, like it. That I will never understand. I guess they're looking for a little bit of brainless entertainment, and that's exactly what they find with Nazi Zombie Army. For me, it is monotonous and pointless. X-Plane 10 Global. Alright, I'm going to admit that I have basically zero background in flight simulators whatsoever. I did do a little bit of research on this game, and it does appear that there are mixed impressions. The thing is that a lot of the things which appear to be wrong with it are not the sort of things that I personally would even understand, much less have a problem with, because again, I don't play these kind of games. So this is the kind of thing that you're going to have to do a little bit of research on your own, I'm afraid, because if you're into Sims, you're going to know exactly what you're looking for. There's plenty of information out there as regards to explaining. For the most part, it seems to be relatively well-liked, but there are some very specific things that appear to be problematic in this game. And I'll be damned if I can explain any of them to you. I don't know anything about flight simulators. I am truly, truly sorry. What I can tell you for certain is that you are going to be in line for a ridiculous amount of DLC. Currently, there is $682 worth of DLC for this game. And most of the X-Plane stuff isn't on sale, so ouch. Well, simulators, they're an entirely different world. And I have never been into them, I have to say. I probably won't start now. Wreckfest. This is an early access racing game by the guys that made Flat Out 2. Now that sounds like a good thing, because Flat Out 2 was a good thing. Yeah, and it appeared that Wreckfest was looking pretty good from the outset. There is a bit of a problem with it though. They haven't updated it in about 8 months. Now, they recently, and by recently I mean today or yesterday, said, okay, yeah, we've got a new update coming. And essentially, it seems like they've had to completely rewrite parts of the engine. So a lot of people have been very upset because they bought the game and then nothing happened with it. They got a very, very basic multiplayer mode and some basic single player, but no campaign, and a very, very threadbare experience, even though the physics engine is really, really fun, and there is a lot of potential here. And that's the best way to describe it. Potential. It's not done yet. It's not even close to being done yet. And while the developers claim they're about to update it, we haven't seen any real evidence of that yet. So, hold off, at least in my honest opinion on this one. Homeworld Remastered. This game's great. Buy it if you like space strategy. I mean, if I wanted to really sum this up in about 5 seconds flat, that would be it. It's a really, really nice remaster. It's one of the best remasters ever made. The sheer amount of detail and effort that they put into making this game better is phenomenal. It's not just in terms of the graphical or audio assets either. It's in terms of the multiplayer and the skirmish mode and the number of additions that they have made and changes to the mechanics for the better, at least in my honest opinion. For one thing, they swapped out the UI from Homeworld 1 for the UI in Homeworld 2, which is significantly better, so you don't have to go to a separate screen and take your eyes away from the action or to build things. It's great. It really, really is. I love Homeworld to death. I mean, it's got an amazing campaign mode, great skirmish mode and multiplayer options. It's the complete package. This is absolutely worthy of your attention if you have even a passing interest in RTS. It's actually very easy to get into as well, although it does appear from the outset to be somewhat intimidating. It actually isn't, and it's really easy to learn to play, so please give it a shot. It's absolutely worthwhile, and there are very few remasters, in my opinion, that are worth the money, and this one is top of the pile when it comes to ones that are. Tales from the Borderlands. Right, well, if you've played any Telltale game in the last couple of years, I think you know exactly what this is about. They found a formula and they're sticking to it. It's a narrative game with very, very small elements of point-and-click adventures, as well as a few decisions that you have to make that affect the rest of the experience. This one happens, of course, to be based in the Borderlands world, and it actually benefits quite a lot from that theme and that setting. I think that it's a setting that hasn't been explored that well, and maybe just doesn't work as well as it should as a first-person shooter. I mean, I liked the original Borderlands, but the games that came out since then have seemed rather samey and really just very iterative, whereas this is a very intriguing take on a very interesting universe, but without all of the grinding and without all of the shooting. So, Tales from the Borderlands might be worthy of your time if you're interested in playing what is a narrative, comedic space adventure set on a backwater planet filled with bandits and freaks and mutants and all manner of nasty critters. Just bear in mind, this is an episodic game, which means that it isn't finished yet. They're about to release episode 3 in a couple of weeks, so they're about halfway through the season, which means that as you buy it right now, it's going to give you about 3 to 3.5 hours of gameplay, give or take. XCOM, Enemy Unknown and Enemy Within. These are pretty damn good, honestly. They're a nice modern take on the XCOM formula. Certainly more simple, and with a laundry list of problems. No doubt about that, but that doesn't mean that they're bad games. I mean, a lot of what I disagree with in these titles is from a pure design standpoint, and that's mostly coming from somebody that played the old XCOM games a ton when he was a lot younger, and was hoping for some of those features to be integrated into the new game. And the new game does simplify things just a little bit. I mean, you can't have more than one transport aircraft, so you have to pick and choose between the cities you defend. The base building is very basic. There are no real base invasions outside of the campaign. Things like that. Little problems here and there. But if you haven't played any of the XCOM games, this is a great way to start, and XCOM 2 is obviously on the horizon, so it is a good time to play. What I will say is the DLC for XCOM is lackluster with the exception of the expansion pack, which is Enemy Within. That's good. That adds a lot to the game. I would thoroughly recommend the expansion, but the DLC Slingshot is a waste of time, frankly. It's just a couple of missions and a shortcut to an item. Nothing really too exciting there. And there's also some cosmetic stuff available as well for your soldiers. Recommended mod for this, by the way, if you happen to have already played this and you want a bigger challenge, is the Long War. But bear in mind, it's bloody hard. Really, really bloody hard. I would not start with the Long War mod. The game's perfectly functional on its own, but I would certainly consider starting with Enemy Within as well, because it is a great expansion and adds a lot to the game. And that brings us to our deal of the day, the Metro franchise. This is Metro along with Metro Redux. What they did was they did a bit of remastering on Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light. Now, Metro 2033 benefited a great deal from this because For one thing, the original game didn't run that well, so it's good that they improved that, and they added a bunch of features, rebalanced the game, made the gunplay more interesting, and so on and so forth. So it's a good way to re-experience Metro 2033, which at the time was very atmospheric and very impressive graphically, but had some mechanical issues. Metro Last Light is absolutely cracking. It was one of my favorite games of that year. The Redux version doesn't improve too much, but considering the price, it's worth just picking up the Redux version. Like, why would you not? There's a Redux bundle, which is 80% off. If I was to choose one of them, I'd probably pick Last Light. I still think it's a bit of a better game, but 2033 Redux is much, much closer to Last Light now, whereas 2033, the original, had a lot of problems which Last Light improved upon. They are first-person shooters set in a post-apocalyptic Russia, and they are very atmospheric, unbelievably impressive from a graphical standpoint, and have a great deal to offer. Alright folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Salebox. Now I'd like to remind you I'm going to be away this weekend. I'm going to go and watch WWE in Ohio. It's going to be great. That means that we may not have some Salebox videos. I am taking my microphone with me, so I will endeavor to create some and have Chris edit them together, but I can't guarantee it. Just want to point that out. I cannot guarantee it because I really don't know what's going to be happening there, how good my internet's going to be, and so on and so forth. So please do bear that in mind. I will be back, I think, on Monday night, and I should be able to resume from there. Thanks a lot for watching, folks. I'll see you next time.